Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mountain Studio. I'm downtown Salt Lake City right now in Utah. And as you can see, it's a beautiful day. And I'm near one of the top tourist attractions in Utah, which is Temple Square. And Temple Square is right over there. And as you can see, it's called Temple Square because there's a huge temple. And that is the temple for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, probably their most important temple in the world. So I wanted to share that with you today as my wife and I were walking through here. Keep watching, and I hope you enjoy the next video. Bye. Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mountain Studio. If you're interested in ascending that big mountain of iOS development, then subscribe and click that bell icon down below so you can get notified when new videos come out. Today, we're setting up a table view with section headers. In this video, we're going to start to build that next screen that shows activities that a user will be doing while they're on a trip. We definitely need section headers for this. In a previous video, you saw me mock up these 3 prototypes in Keynote. The designs are still being voted on and discussed on my Patreon website. So for today, we're just going to get started by showing you the model and what these different parts consist of, and then how to take that model and build out our table view with the section headers. So how are we going to put this together? Well, of course, we're using a table view, and then that table view has section headers, which you see as the days. And then underneath the section headers, I'll have regular rows, table view rows, that'll show activities. If you remember from a previous video a long time ago, we established this data structure that exists on 3 levels. And this is how we're going to structure our data. We already have trips set up. And I've gone ahead and added the data structure for the days and activities too, which I'm going to show you in just a bit. So to show you these models more in depth, the days here consists of an ID, a title, subtitle, and activity models. So what is activity models? Well, that is an array that's going to hold that next model down below. The user adds activities to their itinerary. So the user can enter a title and a subtitle. They can also add a photo, because sometimes I notice that when I go on a trip, sometimes I take screenshots of the map of where I'm going to. So that way, if I don't have a data connection, then I can just pull up this photo and find out where I'm going. And then there's also this activity type which they can assign, which further identifies the type of activity they're going to do. I plan on showing different icons to represent these types, so it helps the user more easily identify and spot the activities when it's in a table view. And these are the icons I'm going to use for these types. Okay, so let's jump into our project, and I'm going to show you what we have so far for the data structure, and then we're going to move forward and start building out that screen with that data. But before we do that, we need to update our board of tasks. So we already did this where we navigate to the trips itinerary screen or the activity screen. So that's done. And prototype days and activity screen. Well, I did that and the patrons are looking at it right now. I don't know if I should keep that in doing this week or, yeah, it's not quite done yet. So let's keep that in doing this week. So then we're working on this next one. We want to show the days and activities in a table view on that next screen. Okay, so we're in Xcode, and I'm going to give you a tour of this data model update that we have here. So this is the data class, and this class isn't new, but I just want to give you kind of like a refresher on how it's set up. So the data class only has one property, and it's static, which means we can access it from anywhere in the application, and it holds an array of trips. So these are all the trips that the user has entered. Now let's take a look at this trips model right here. Okay, there is a new property here called day models. So before, the trip just had an ID, a title, and an image. Now it has a new property called day models, which holds a collection of days. So when a person goes on a trip, of course, they're going to be there for, say they're going to be there for a week. So there's going to be 7 days in the trip. And this is where the days get held. Now, there's another change I made too. I changed this to a struct. It was a class before, but it didn't really need to be a class. I changed it to a struct because structs are more commonly known to hold data that changes. So one of my subscribers pointed that out, and so I changed it to a struct because he was right. It should have been a struct. All right, good. So now let's take a look at day models here. Let's go into this folder, day model. And again, it's another struct. And a day is pretty simple. It just has a title and a subtitle, as you might have remembered from the mockup that I showed you earlier. And it also has one more property here called activity models. And this is going to hold an array of all your activities, all the things you're going to do on that day. So let's take a look at the activity. And it's another struct, has an ID, a title, a subtitle of what they're going to do for that activity. And then it has the activity type, which basically tells us, is it going to be a flight? Is it an auto rental? Is it a hotel? I'll show you that enum afterwards. If we look at the enum, you can see it's just those 5 activity types right now. And we can add more later on if we need to, but I want to start with 5 for now. Okay, now if we go into trip functions, I made a change here too. I used to create all the mock data right here, but I extracted out all the mock data and I put it into its own class, this mock data class here. So where do we begin? What's the next step from here? Well, we want to start building out that screen with the days and activities. So right now, when a user clicks on a trip, we navigate them to the activities screen. So let's take a look at that. And this is code that we built 2 videos ago for navigation. We get our storyboard, and then on our storyboard, we instantiate the initial view controller. So we just get that one view controller, the activities view controller, and then we push it on the navigation stack. Remember when I talked about the navigation stack? It's like a deck of cards, right? So this trips view controller, this is the bottom card in the deck, also known as the root view controller. And then we just push view controllers on top of it, and which gives us the back button. We can easily go back and forth. Now, what I need to do is when I click on this cell, I want to get the trip and I want to get the trip's ID. And I want to use that ID on the activities view controller, the next screen. And I'm going to use that ID to get all of the days and activities. So the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out, well, which trip did I just click on? So let's write that code. Remember, our data class just has one property, has our trip models. And this is an array. So how do I get the correct item in the array? Well, I just use the index path. And I figure out which row I clicked on, and that's going to be the trip that I clicked on. So we have our trip. And then what I want to do is I want to do something like this. I want to access my view controller, and I want to set a property on it, like trip ID. I want to say trip ID equals this trip.id, like that. Okay, well, this property obviously doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to get that error there. So what I need to do is, this instantiate initial view controller, let's take a look at it. I'm holding down the option, and then I'm clicking on that function right there. And we can see here, it just returns a UI view controller. Well, UI view controller doesn't know about this trip ID, but the activities view controller will. So what I need to do is I need to convert that to an activities view controller. And you do it just like this. And once I do that, it's going to expose to me all of the properties and functions, public properties and functions that I create on the activities view controller. But this property still doesn't exist because I haven't created it yet, right? So let's do that. Let's go into the activities view controller and let's create that property. Let me just go back real quick. And I'm going to copy it just to make sure I don't mess it up here. Okay. And then we'll go back. I'm just going to paste in that property that I created. And it is a UUID. Now it's telling me that I don't have an initializer for this property yet, meaning I'm not setting it. Well, I'm not going to set it in this view controller. So what I need to do is I need to make it optional with either the exclamation point or the question mark, right? But the exclamation point just basically tells it will definitely have a value. I could use a question mark, but I don't want to write all through my code, all this nil checking to see if it has value or not. Because if it doesn't, well, probably shouldn't even be in this screen in the first place because you can only get in the screen if it has a value. So that's why I'm saying it will definitely have a value. All right, good. So now if we build it, it should work. Yeah, that looks good. So we go back here and we go down to the bottom. And why is this error here? Value has no trip ID. It does, doesn't it? Didn't I just add it? Okay. Okay, so the error message didn't go away. I don't know why. All right, good. Now that we have our ID, what do we have to do next? Well, we have to actually do a retrieval and get that data. Luckily, what I did is I built that function for you. So let's look at our trip functions here. And this function already existed before, but I created a new function down here where you pass in an ID. So read trip by ID, and you pass in your UUID, and it goes and retrieves it. And it returns a trip model too. Now, this code might be kind of confusing, so you might have to go back and review how we built this function right here where I talk about, what's actually happening here. And I'm going to kind of brush over it real quick because it's kind of like a review. So basically what's happening here, dispatch queue, global, quality of service, user initiated. That basically means we're going to grab a thread and it's going to be a background thread, meaning it's not going to be running on the main thread. So there's two categories of threads, right? There's the main thread where the UI runs and it's very responsive and super fast. And then there's background threads, and they can be a little bit slower, and you can set the priority with this quality of service property. User initiated is probably the highest priority for quality of service, which I'm pretty sure it is actually. The slowest one is background. And that's a common mistake you'll see programmers make, is they'll change this to background. Where is it? Background. Yeah, they'll change the background like this because they think, oh, well, it's a background thread, meaning it's not the main thread, so that's fine. Well, that's true. It is a background thread, but it's the lowest priority. And if there's other things happening, well, that's going to take a back seat. And you might want to reprioritize it and say, hey, I need this data like right away. So we're not going to use the background thread. We're going to use the user initiated thread. Async basically means, hey, continue running this program, even though it's taken a while to get these trip models here. Don't stop the program. Let the user still be able to use the program. And that way, the app doesn't look like it's frozen. Okay, so trip models, that's an array. And what I want to do is I want to get the one trip from this array, and I want to find the first matching one where the ID for the trip matches the ID that I pass in. And this right here, this function, the first where, is basically a function for arrays where it'll find you the first matching item in the array that matches your criteria or your predicate, they say. So I'm going to hold down Option. I'll click on this, and you can see here, returns the first element of a sequence, like an array, that satisfies the given predicate, or like your where statement. If you're used to writing queries for databases, it's like kind of like a where statement, right? Okay, and I want you to notice something else that it does too. Notice it returns an optional, so it can return nil. If it doesn't find anything, it can return nil. And basically this $0, that represents each trip model. It's kind of like shorthand. Okay, now once it finds this trip, it's going to call this line right here, which basically just puts you back on the main thread and returns the trip. Okay, so that's what we're accessing. So let's go back to our ActivitiesViewController, and let's call that function with this trip ID that we now have. So there are two read trips, and this is the one that we want. And we're going to pass in our trip ID. Okay, I'm going to hit Tab and come over to this completion, and then I'm going to hit Enter. And instead of trip model, I'm just going to call it model. So remember, this is the model that we get back, and it'll either be nil or it'll actually have our trip. So here we basically write, well, what do we want to have happen after we get the model back? And what I want to do is I want to take that value that we get back, that model, and I want to store it in a variable. I want it in a local variable because when it comes time for my table view to read the data, this is where it's going to read it from. Okay, and I'm making it optional because, like I said, this function can return nil. Now, it shouldn't, right? It shouldn't return nil because we just clicked on it. We just got it back. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it nil, or I'm going to keep it optional for now, because what if something goes wrong with your read function? The person loses their data connection. So they had a data connection when they got all the trips, but then when they tapped on a trip, they had lost their data connection, and it's not going to return anything. So it's going to return a nil. So now that I have this property, I can set it to the model. So I'll say self.tripModel here equals model. Okay, now if you know anything about closures, which is what this is, between this open and close brace here, that is a closure. So what's really happening is this code right here, this actually is getting passed into the trip functions right here. You see, notice this is a parameter, right? So I'm passing that closure in, and it's getting called right here. This is actually where it's getting called. So the important thing to know about that is this word self right here. When I say self.tripModel, that means I'm passing in this whole class into this function, into this closure. And what if this happens? What if, I click on that first screen, I click on a trip, it navigates to this ActivitiesViewController, and then I quickly click back. So meanwhile, this function has already started. It's already starting to read the trip. It's going off to a database maybe, it's going off somewhere else to get the data. And when it comes back, there's no ActivitiesViewController anymore because you already went back to the trip screen. So it's going to throw an error. It's going to make your app crash. So we can't guarantee that this is always going to be available, right? Because they could have navigated back right away and there's no ActivitiesViewController anymore. So what we want to do is when we pass this code into our trip function to read trip, we want to pass in a weak version so it doesn't cause any problems if self doesn't exist anymore. Basically is what it's saying. So what we'll do is we'll pass in a weak self. Yeah, like that. And then you notice it's giving us a problem here. Now it says, hey, self is optional. It means it can be nil. Because that's what weak self does, is it makes it optional, turns it into an optional value. So it says, what do you want to do here? Well, I could just do this and that'll fix it. That's totally fine. But why even run this code if self doesn't exist anymore? If we're not even on the page, why even run any of that code? Because it doesn't matter. The person is already gone from ActivitiesViewController. So instead, why don't we just get out of this function altogether? Because we don't need to run it. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a guard. And I'm going to say self equals self. And if it doesn't have a value, then I will say else return. Let's just get out of this function. This is something new that you could do. And I think it was like SWIT 4, maybe 4.1. So we don't even need that. If it's not nil, it's just going to reassign itself to the self variable. Like normally what you do, right? You just create a separate variable, like maybe you say myself, and then you use this, right here. But what you can do now is you can just say self equals self. That might be kind of confusing, but it's pretty darn convenient because there's kind of like this consistency. And you notice, see the highlighting? Like it knows which one is which. And if I highlight this one, you notice it highlights the appropriate one. So it's pretty cool. It knows which one is which. So it might makes it a little bit easier to read for some people. Okay, so if it is nil, then we're just getting out of this because there's no reason why we need to run the rest of this code. And there's going to be more code here too. Okay, there's a couple of other things that we're going to need too. But first, let's run the program and I want to show you something. Okay, notice it's a little bit different now. I added some images to the trips. So you don't have to keep setting that and we can get a better idea of what it's going to look like. So let's click on trip to Bali. Now, I want to bring your attention to the nav bar up on top. It's blank right now. And when the user comes into here, we should probably tell them what trip they're on. What did you just pick? Just so it gives them a confirmation that they know, oh, I clicked on the Bali trip or I clicked on the Russian trip. So what we want to do is we want to set that title. And if you notice from the other mockups, they all had an image on the back, right? And that image is going to be whatever image they chose for the trip, whatever the user chose as an image to represent that trip. I want to make that the background image for this view controller. So if I click on Mexico, I want to see all those colorful skulls for the Day of the Dead as my background. So let's do that. So let's set the title, and we can only set the title. Remember, this can be nil, right? So let's just check to make sure if it's nil or not. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this same kind of pattern right here, because if it is nil, why even run the code below that? Okay, and if it's not nil, then we'll set the title. And that is basically this property right here, this title property. That value is what appears in the nav bar. Okay, so we get the title from our trip, and we assign it to the navbar. And I want to be able to assign the image to the background, but we don't have that control yet. We don't have a UI image on there. So, whoa, what did I just hit enter to? I don't know. I'm not quite sure what I just hit there because it came down too fast right when I hit enter. All right. Hopefully it wasn't anything too bad. So what I'm going to do is I'll have a property, that's something like probably background image view, something like that. And I'll say image equals model dot image. All right, that should work. I do this a lot. I start coding against properties that don't exist yet. And it's kind of a habit because I'm used to working in tools where it's going to give you an error like this, but it'll also give you an option and like, hey, this doesn't exist. Do you want to create it? But Xcode, it's not quite there yet. So we have to manually create these properties. All right, this is going to be an outlet. So let's just add that outlet here. We'll just create that manually. IB outlet. Let me just copy that, make sure I don't misspell it here. And it'll be a UIImageView. One of those guys. All right. All right, let's jump into Interface Builder and we'll add that control. And I'm just going to delete all this because we don't need it anymore. Clean it up. Image view, we'll add that on there. Okay. Now, normally, you use these safe margins, safe area margins, but I think we want this to extend all the way up and down, on the scene here. So let's do that. We'll add some constraints. Yeah, I'm going to add some constraints. And I just want to double check. I want to go into these constraints and I want to make sure that they are actually connected to the super view. Okay. Yeah, let's change this. See how it's using safe area? So if I turn it sideways, if I turn the phone sideways, the image will probably just, it won't cover these, the inside notches here. So I want to change that so everything is completely against the super view. So I'm just going to double click that. And instead of safe area, I'm going to change it to super view. There we go. And we have another one here, safe area leading. So we'll change that to the super view leading. All right, that should do it. Now we have to connect up our outlet too, right? Okay, we're on the wrong one here. Let's go to automatic. And there's our outlet. Let's just drag it and connect it, and it should be good. Okay, so let's test that. Make sure there's no error. Okay, good. Let's test it. Make sure the background image is coming up. Okay, trip to Bali. There's the image. Okay, there's a couple of different things I want to set here. Yeah, we want to make the image, so right now it's getting distorted to fit inside the boundaries of the control. So we're going to change that. I want to maintain the aspect. So I want to maintain the aspect, but I also want it to fit the height and the width and everything. So we'll change that to aspect fit. And let's run that. I want to show you guys something here. Okay, trip to Bali. Oh no, I did the wrong thing. I want aspect fill. I thought I chose aspect fill. Did I not? No, aspect fit. Yeah, I want aspect fill because I want to fill up the whole UI image. There we go. Okay, good. So that's exactly what I want. But notice this. Take a look. Does something seem kind of weird there when I click the back button? It's like moving the whole image over, right? And then it just like disappears. So when I'm popping that view controller off, it's sliding it over and then it's making it disappear. And it's very interesting here because the image is so big, it's actually coming out of these boundaries, on the right and left-hand side. And then when I click back, it's just sliding the whole image over. So there's a way to get rid of that. And it's basically, let's click on our UI image view. So it's basically this property right here, clip to bounds. By default, this isn't set. So if I have a small UI image view and I assign it a huge image, then the image is just going to go right outside the bounds. But what we want to do is we want to clip it. So as soon as it goes outside the bounds, it's just going to cut it off. And that should fix our problem here. There we go. Okay, that looks better. Oh, that's funny. And so when we come to Russian trip, no error was thrown because there was no image. So we handled that fine. And everything's working fine there. Okay, good. So what's next? Well, we want to add a table view. We want to show that data, right? We want to show those section headers, and we want to show, the activities inside of those days. So let's work on that. Let's get our table view. Whoa, what am I on here? Oh, this is, okay. The focus must have been on the code here because it brings up the code snippets. That's funny. Let's just go back to the interface builder since we're going to be working with that. Table view. There we go. Let's get our table view on there. And for the table view, I think I will keep it on the safe area because I don't want the rows going up, under this notch here. So let's keep it like that. And for the bottom, I'm going to ignore the safe area. I'm not going to respect the safe area. I want the bottom to go all the way down to the super view. So that's fine. Let's set our constraints. 0, 0, 0, 0. And we're going to have to do the same thing that we did before. We're going to come here and let's take a look at our constraints. And remember, it's the bottom one. Oh, perfect. Okay, good. So the bottom one is connected to the super view. That's exactly what I wanted. It figured it out. So no changes there. Safe area on everything else, that's fine. That's fine. That's what I want. Okay, good. Now let's create an outlet for this table view. Yeah, we'll stick it wherever it wants to go here. It can't make up its mind. And we'll just call it table view. Okay. Now, if you've watched my other video, let me just go straight to the code here. There's a couple things. Okay, first thing we need to do is we need to set the data source for our table view. And it's going to be ourself. This class is going to handle being the data source for it. It's going to give me a problem first because we don't conform to the UITableView data source yet. So let's add that. And I like to do it with an extension. It organizes the code better for me. Okay, what am I in? The ActivitiesViewController. And it is going to add more functionality and be a UITableView data source. There it is right there. Okay, there are 2 required functions that you need. And you don't have to remember what they are anymore. Xcode will just tell you, so it makes it a lot easier. So I just click on this button and say, tell me what the 2 required functions are. And boom, it adds them there for you. So super handy there. I'm loving that. And I feel like there's something I'm forgetting to tell you guys. Oh yeah. Okay, so let's go back up to our read trip function here. We go through here. If we're not on the screen anymore, we return, we're out of there. If we don't have a model, we return and we're out of here. But if we do have a model, we set the title, the background image, and then at this point, I want to reload the data in my table view so the data shows up, right? So let's do that. Let's say we have our table view now, and we want to say reload data. Okay, good. So that part is done. We're not going to do any more with this function or initializing or anything like that. Now we can concentrate on just the table view. Now, here's what I'm going to do, guys. I want to work on my section headers first. I don't want to worry about the rows right now that has all the activities. So when it asks for how many rows in each section, I'm just going to return 0 for now. And I can't return nil because it definitely wants a UITableViewCell. So what I'm going to have to do is just create a TableViewCell and return it. Now, make note here that this is not how you do it. Remember, this is just temporary code because I don't want to worry about this right now. And it's just going to be default, and I'll just give it an identifier and just call it cell. Okay. All right, so that will build and that will run, and we won't see anything in the table view right now. So I'm not going to run it and show you guys because it's just going to be an empty table view. What I want to do is I want to show some section headers. And in order to show section headers, there are 2 functions that we have to implement for that. And they're inside the UITableView data source. So we're going to implement them right in here. And actually, let me show you what they are. So I'm going to hold down Command. I'm going to right click on there. And here's our UITableView data source. So the first thing that we're going to need is this one right here, number of sections. Normally it defaults to 1, so you never have to implement it. But we have to implement it now because we don't know how many days we're going to have. Remember, each section is going to represent a day in the person's vacation, in their trip. So we're going to tell it how many days we have. And the second one is this one right here, title for header and section. So what this will do is we give this section some text. We want to tell it what to show. These are the two things we want to implement. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this function right here. Since we're here, I'm going to go back and we will implement this. This is what I don't like here. There's no easy way to implement this. Normally, right, you can just do this. You can start typing in table view and you just pick your function. Title for, might as well just click that since we're going to need it. But what about the number of sections, right? So I don't know if is there an easy way to do it, guys? Do you guys know? Oh, no, it's right there. Holy crap. I never even noticed that before. I just saw it right down here. Okay, that's awesome. So there you go, guys. I just learned something new. Maybe you did too. Maybe you could have taught me how to do this. Okay, so we're going to return. Now, remember, when we get our data, we assign it to trip model, right? So let's look at this. We'll say return trip model dot, and we have day models right here. This is how many days we have. And this is the count that we want to return. But notice what it's telling us here. It says, we have an optional type int ? And that's because day models can be nil. We might not have any days. So what we're going to do is, if we don't have any days, then we're just going to return a 0. And we want to use this thing right here that's called the coalesce operator. I'll explain what that means. Basically, what it means is, let me just put a 0 in there. It means that whatever is on the left side of the double question marks, if that's nil, then return what's on the right side. So you can actually chain these. You can say, if that part is nil, then return a 1. If that's nil, then return a 2. These aren't nil though, right? But you get the idea. You can have variables, a whole chain of variables that could possibly be nil, and it just keeps going down the chain here. It says, if on the left-hand side is nil, then give me what's on the right. And then if that's nil, then give me what's on the right of that, and so on and so on. So we can delete that. We don't need that. So that is your coalesce operator there. Okay, now title for header and section. We want to access that day model again, and we want to return the title. So let's do that. You can just use the section parameter that's passed in. That'll give us the correct day model, and we want to return the title. All right, great. Now notice here, I don't have to use a coalesce operator, because if the day model is nil or if trip models is nil, because we can return a nil instead of a string. You can see it with a question mark right here. But here, there's no question mark here. We have to definitely return a value. But here, it doesn't matter. We can return a nil or an empty string or a real value, and it'll be totally fine with it. So let's run that, see what it looks like. We should get some section headers. There we go. So there's our section headers, and that's totally what we're expecting. We have 5 days in this vacation, and they're all going to be section headers. So that's perfect. That's working just fine. Now, I mentioned before, we could return subtitles, so it's the title and then the subtitle. So we can do that if we want. Let's do this. Let's say let title equal that. And it's pretty much the same thing, except I'm just going to access the subtitle. There we go. It is lowercase. I did use lowercase t. All right, let's just keep it consistent there. And then we're going to, we're going to put them together, and we can use, a string interpolation for that. And the way you do that is you just use the backslash and the parentheses. And we can access our title, and then we'll have a space, and we'll show the subtitle. Actually, I'm going to put a dash in there. Like that. There we go. Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this while working in playgrounds. When you try to print out something that could be a nil or optional, it puts the word optional around it. So what I want to do is I want to use that coalesce operator again. The nil coalescing operator. I think, is that what it was called? Can I do this? Can I hold down Option and then click on that? No. No quick help either. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is, title could be nil, right? So what I'm going to do is just say, if it's nil, just give me an empty string. Same with this. If it's nil, give me an empty string. And that should get rid of this error here, or the warning. Okay, that's good. So let's run that, see what that looks like. Yeah, there we go. All right, perfect. So there's our section headers. Now we can go back to actually showing some rows for the sections. Let's start with the number of rows in section. And remember, this is how many activities you have inside of each day. So I'm just going to return how many activities are in that day. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll say return. And remember, I'm just going to use the section again to get the correct day. And then from here, I want to look at how many activities they have, the count of the activities. And it's possible we can run into the same problem again, right? Where trip model is nil. So what we want to do is we want to click on here. We can fix it with the nil coalescing operator, and we just return 0 if it is. You guys are probably going to become masters of this nil coalescing operator here by the end of this video. Okay, now time for the cell. So we'll get the cell the normal way. And notice, I didn't create a prototype cell. I don't have any cells with this identifier right now. So it's possible that cell can come back as nil, right? So there's a couple ways I can handle this. It won't let me get away with this. If I try to return this cell, it'll say, no, you can't do that, because cell could be nil. And I need a real cell to dequeue, or that's created. So I can, in this code right here, I could create a cell at this point, which maybe I will. Or I was going to say, what I could also do is I can come to the table view control, and I can go to the properties and just create a prototype cell here. I can click on that and give it the identifier cell. And then what'll happen there is when I try to dequeue it, it will find this prototype cell with this identifier. But I'm not going to do that. There's a reason why. I want to show you guys something else that's pretty cool. So what I'll do is I'll just create one. Let's see. So if cell is nil, then we'll create one. So we can't do this because we have to create a variable for that. And we'll have to be able to assign to it, because I'm going to create one here, like this. I'm going to say UITableViewCell. And it's going to be a normal one, or default, I guess they call it. And then I'll give it an identifier. So yeah, that should work. And if it's nil, then it has the value. So it will have a value at this point, because if it is nil, then I'll definitely be giving it a value. Okay, so that should work, but we're not going to see any values in here, right? So we actually have to give it a value. So I'll say cell, and these default cells, they actually have labels in them. So we'll use those. You can see one right here, a detail label. I don't want the detail label though. I want the, what's it called? Just a text label, I guess it's called. Text, and then we'll use the trip model. We want the day models. Now here, I don't have a parameter for section, but this index path does have the section in it. So I'm just going to use that. That'll give me the correct day. Let's make some room here for ourselves. And then for the activity models, well, that is just the row. And then I'm going to get the title. Okay, so that's a pretty long string there, but that should work. So let's run it and see what we got. All right, there we go. So you can see the section header here, has a light gray color, and then it shows the rows for each of the days. So that is perfect. That's exactly what we want. And this is actually pretty cool. I didn't know it was going to do this, but it actually gives us a little bit of room, so it doesn't cover up that last cell. I didn't think it was going to do that. I actually thought it was going to be like this, where it's getting kind of like cut off, but it's not. So that's perfect. So we actually don't have to do anything. What I was going to suggest was I can add a footer, a UI view footer to the table view, that will just be, right under the last row. and just take up extra space like that. But looks like we don't even need it. So that's pretty cool. Now, guys, you just learned how to set up this table view using nothing but the UITableView data source and 4 functions. So how are you going to remember that next time? Are you going to remember it? Or do you want to give yourselves like some kind of hint or some easier way to remember this and implement it in the future? Well, let me give you a hint. One of the things that I did earlier on, before I memorized it, was I created a code snippet. So you can do that in Xcode 10. We could just highlight this part right here and right click and say create code snippet right here. Awesome. And there it is. So it creates it for us. And we can just give it a name, like table view with section headers. And we can give it some kind of summary. Okay, completion shortcut. What do we have to type in to bring this up? Table view sections, table view with sections. Yeah, it's up to you. Now, the completion scope, that's an interesting one, is where do you want to type in this shortcut and it will offer you the suggestion to fill it in? Should it be at the top level, like a class level, or should it be more narrow than that? We can say top level because it's kind of like top level, I guess you could say. And do we want to use these names in here? Well, this is, of course not. We don't want to use that. But what do we put in here? Well, we can put in placeholders like this, and then we just put in our own name. Oh, I kind of messed that up. Okay, so keep the text in there first, and just put in like say, view controller. And then this will be the part that shows where, they have to enter in their own view controller. So we just use the greater than pound and then pound less than. There we go. And you've seen that. This is where you hit tab and then you type in your own thing. And you can do that with the rest of these things. Or we could just default them. I'll just default them to 0. Man, I need more space here. Come on, guys, give me more space. How do I make this bigger? For this, let's just return like an empty string. Whoa. Number of sections, we'll just return 0. And then there's a lot of stuff in here. Let's do this. We'll leave everything in there and we'll just set it to like an empty string. All right, that looks good. You can see I have other snippets in here. But now, later on, if we want to use this, then we just say, what I say, table view with sections. Oh, it's showing my previous ones. I should probably delete those because some of these I don't even use anymore. Where is ours though? Yeah, it's right here. Okay, table view with sections. So deleting, that's an interesting one because it used to be super hard to delete these, but it's a lot easier in Xcode 10. So let me just show you that real quick. So I'm going to click on this button up here to bring up code snippets. And like this one, Swift 3, download image from URL. No, I don't need that anymore. So all you have to do now is you just hit the delete button and it'll get rid of it. Yeah, there we go. Hit delete. Yes, I want to delete it. So if we type in tail view with sections, yeah, that's the only one that comes up. And then I hit that and then boom, there you go. And you can just, start typing in your new view controller, ActivitiesViewController. So I don't have to remember this and I can use this for a while until I actually do remember it and I do get it down. So that's how you do that. All right, guys, let's summarize what you just learned. You learned how to create a table view with section headers. You learned how to even take that and put it into a code snippet. You learned a lot of other things along the way too, like the nil coalesce operator. And so when it comes time to creating that table view with sections, you just have to remember 4 things. You start with the UITableView data source, and you use that automatic function to implement the 2 default functions that Xcode will help you with. And then from there, there's 2 things that you have to remember. You have to tell it how many sections you want to show. Then you have to tell it a title for the header in the section. Of course, this is just showing text right now, and we want to design it so it's going to look something like what you see on the right-hand side there. So we're going to do that in the next video. We're going to customize it. I'm going to show you how to create section header and cells that go along with that. So subscribe and click on that bell icon, and you'll get notified when I come out with that next video. If you like this video and you learned something new, give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, And if you want to help out, you can always supply a translation for the title in the description of this video by clicking on the 3 dots down below the video, and it'll give you a translation option. And that will help people who speak your language be able to find this video more easily. All right, thanks, guys.